Hello and welcome to 2021 Comic-Con at Home. And this is the Comics Journalism panel. I'm Heidi McDonald. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Beat at comicsbeat.com. And I do this panel every year at San Diego to take a look at the state of comics journalism, talk to the people who are making some noise in comics journalism, talking about the issues facing all of us comics journalists. And this year I have a small but mighty panel joining me. We have different topics that we talk about this year. And this year it's really about getting more marginalized voices involved in comics journalism, always a struggle, but more important than ever right now with the things that we faced the past pandemic year. And so I'm really honored to have Wendy Brown of the Eisner Award winning Women Write About Comics with me, and Tiffany Babb of all the good comic sites with us. And so if you want to just talk a little about, so Wendy, just, describe what is Women Write About Comics? What do you do there? Maybe a little of your secret origin.
Well, Women Write About Comics is women writing about comics and also non-binary people as well. We want to amplify the voices that you don't hear enough of, and we approach things from very different and sometimes unusual and sometimes a little bit horny on Maine perspectives. We just love to have fun and are very passionate about comics and want to make sure that everyone understands that comics is for everyone. So that's our goal.
That's which is fantastically. And Tiffany, you write for a lot of different sites, including Women Write About Comics. But what's a little bit of your, what you do, just to describe what you do?
I actually started at Women Write About Comics. Those are my first few bylines. But I'm mostly at Panel by Panel now and the AV Club as well. And I like to focus specifically on kind of genre books, books that have a lot of queer representation, or I like to do queer readings of genre books. I'm very into like story structure and how either the medium or the genre or the tradition of certain types of comics influence the way comics are written now.
Wonderful. Well, obviously, as I said, Tiffany, you write for Panel by Panel, also Eisner nominated this year, and
yes.
Women Write About Comics nominated again this year. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Let me just ask you, why comics? Okay. Now, I have been in comics journalism for 40 years. And I just had to realize that, and was in a very hospitable place for women when I started, but there were more women than people think there were, so that's, I'm big on the history, but I persevered, and here I am 40 years later. So how did you both get into writing about comics, which certainly a lot more welcoming now, but not always welcome to women, not always welcome to people of color, not always welcome to voices that aren't straight white men?
I guess I can go first. I didn't officially start out, wanting to write about comics, but I loved comics from I was very young, and I also loved writing. I did end up going to school for journalism for a little bit. I'd actually wanted to write comics, but there wasn't really any school available for that, and ended up in a very roundabout way back in kind of the back end of journalism by managing an association that handled publications, and then had my own blog where I would write about whatever I was interested in. And then a friend of mine who ran a comic book club and also wrote for Women Write About Comics recommended me to them. And then things just kind of spiraled from there.
It's always how you get sucked in.
Yeah,
I'll tell you.
Spiral.
Yeah, spiral. Yes, exactly. Tiffany, how about you?
I read like some comics as a kid. I read Calvin Hobbes, Archie, like the Sunday newspapers, but I don't think I really got into comics until like I think sophomore year of college. My friend was like, hey, read some of these superhero books, like some of the new stuff at the time. And I read them and I became like full on obsessed. And I had been studying, I was a comp lit student, so I was planning on writing my thesis on Shakespeare and women in Shakespeare. And like the day after I discovered, like the day after I went to the comic book store, I called up my advisor and I was like, "Hey, I'm changing my topic to comics." And like serialized story structure was kind of the big thing that I was obsessed with, and I'm still fairly obsessed with. And so I also started writing a blog, but it never like I wasn't there very long before I just started thinking, well, I'm writing all my school papers on comics. So let's see if I can adapt these into something more readable for, people who aren't paid to read my school papers. And so I reached out to Women Write About Comics, and then I just started going.
Did you work with Wendy then, or were you
No, so Kate Tansky. So I was
okay.
in the comics like academic side, because I was really considering kind of focusing on like staying in academia. No longer there. But at the time I was like, this is definitely the way to go.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I do think both of your stories do back up what I think is the positive part of the comics industry. I mean, there really is this, hierarchy of white privilege and, male privilege that has really defined what the comic book industry has been in the United States and around the world for a long time. But I do feel like it still offers so many opportunities to express yourself that, despite this kind of overall structure that has existed for so long, like once you get in there, it becomes a very welcoming place.
Yeah, and I think that's like to the credit of a lot of people, like the people behind Women Write About Comics, and people who are actually, they're putting the time in, right, with their own free time, with their own, like, they're not being paid, and they're creating platforms for marginalized creators, and they're creating safe spaces for people to express themselves, and for people who may not have kind of the mainstream opinions to write and to publish their writing.
Yeah, the safe space is definitely a big thing for us. There's a lot of women write about comics behind the scenes stuff that obviously people don't get to see a lot, but we have a wonderful community that I'm really proud of and really amazed to be a part of. I've learned so much from so many people, and just having all those different perspectives is just so important and so valuable. So
yeah, and in fact, I just saw. I was looking at the site today, and I saw that Corey wrote this great piece about the Eisner Awards, and talking about the number of women who had been nominated. And I mean, I do love I love Women Write About Comics so much that I steal your writers as much as I possibly can.
Everybody does.
Everybody does. But I mean, I got to be honest, the Beats writers get stolen all the time also. So I take it as a compliment, to
so do I. I'm super proud to see our writers everywhere, and that some of them often come back too, or at least are still promoting us. So
yes, yeah. I mean, I think you have created such a wonderful site that people and community that people do really feel part of it. But I mean, I mean, speaking for myself, at the Beat, I try to have as diverse a staff as possible. And, we definitely do have people representing a lot of different marginalized groups, which I'm very proud of. And, but I do find that, recruiting and finding people is very difficult at times. And I've heard other people, I heard one person talking about their site, and they were like, we need to get more Black writers. And this is obviously last year after Black Lives Matter had happened. And, they were saying, how do I find them? And I was like, well, if they apply, you hire them. And, which is, I'm not here to horn toot, but that's what I do, and it works out fairly well. So, but yeah, how do we get more? How do we promote marginalized voices? How do we get more of them onto all the mainstream sites and get them being heard?
it's that whole creating the safe space and relationships and trust is a huge thing. Especially like if you're just asking for people around, oh, Black Lives Matter is a big thing. Now I'm going to put a tweet out about this, then we're not going to trust you to have our actual backs on anything. Or, it's Black History Month, or Pride Month. So looking for writers. So those kind of things are, your heart might be in the right place, but it might not feel like it for a marginalized person.
And I think there's something to be said about being active about it. There is obviously, when you're getting applications of people who are marginalized, definitely consider them. But I think a lot of issues arise when there are sites that have only published non-marginalized people. And so marginalized people don't apply there because they're like, well, I don't want to waste my time. So if you're kind of moving out of that space and you're going to start hiring marginalized people, like you have to contact, like you have to go the extra step, right? And like if there are marginalized creators you've enjoyed reading at other sites, reach out to them, freelancers, right? This is the world we live in. And kind of once you, I was speaking to an editor once and he was telling me that he used to think it was so weird that women never came to pitch him. And then he's like, oh, it's because like they don't think I'm interested in what they have to say because I haven't published that stuff. And so he started kind of reaching out. And I think that makes a huge difference. Like even for me, when like I was at Women Write About Comics, and then Steve Morris from Shelf Dust contacted me and he was like, hey, would you like to write here? And I think he's kind of like really great at doing this. And this is how he gets so many great new writers. And like he's looking for them. And even beyond that, there's so much opportunity. We're on social media now. There are writers who might write for a different industry, but who tweet a lot about comics. So it's like, hey, would you like to write about this? And kind of thinking outside of the box a little more, and just because this stuff rarely happens naturally because we're all programmed a certain way. If we're only reading white male writers, it makes total sense that we would want to publish white male voices. But so to fix that, we have to like be active and skew back the other way, right?
Yeah. I mean, Wendy, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to speak to Steve at Shelf Dust. He is really amazing at that relationship building and the reaching out. And confession, he's like the only person who's gotten me to write anywhere other than Women Write About Comics because he's so skilled. And there's the networking aspect. I know who he's worked with and, will talk him up to others. So we do have like a freelancing section in our community. So we're always, has anyone written for this group? Yes, they're safe, so just spreading the word too.
Yeah. Well, Steve was actually at the Beat for a while as the golden era, as I call it. But yeah, he's such an amazing person, and I'm just so thrilled to see him go on. And Shelf Dust is such a great site, and he does it's really obvious what a great job he does. And I almost had Steve on this panel, but then I decided the time difference would be just too hard to get people from England and LA and New York all in the same room. So Steve, next time be on the panel.
We still love you, Steve.
We still adore you, Steve. So how do you think that the boys club is showing cracks? I mean, is it on the way out? I mean, what do what's your prognosis for how we make truly the inclusive medium it should be?
I think a lot of people, there are enough who are like, wow, we can't just have our perspectives because it's kind of boring. We're saying the same things over and over. So there are a lot of good people who are realizing that there's a need for just the diverse perspectives. So, and they're helping to make the spaces for us. And then the rest of us are just kind of barging into the spaces anyway. So
right.
No, we're coming in.
Yeah. Now, Tiffany, you write for the AV Club, which is obviously a pretty big outlet, and they do have really great writers, and they're quite inclusive there too. I mean, they definitely try to be progressive about all that. I mean, how does it differ in what you can write for that site and what you write for other sites?
I think Caitlin and Oliver there are both really focused on kind of highlighting marginalized voices, but also kind of letting us do what we want to do. I never get like, oh, you're not allowed to write about this. But I think when it comes to the boys club, it's complicated, right? Because it's still there. It's still very present. It makes a huge impact on the industry. And like I think here's where it's important to draw lines around. There's the comics themselves, and then there's like the industry, and then there's like fan culture, and there are heavy amounts of boys club in all three of those things, but they all kind of function level, right?
Yes.
So like in the industry itself, creating the books, it's definitely there. I mean, look at the Eisner nominations this year, or look at the books being published. Sometimes sometimes it just becomes invisible because you're used to it. And then sometimes someone sent me a book to read. Everyone was kind of gushing about it. And I just read it. I was like, this is exhausting. Everyone is white, working on the book and in the book. It was a book that was very derivative of other cultures in a lot of ways. And it just felt like this is what's being published. Like so many, like this, all these books are being published when there are so many other interesting voices that could be published. And, there are some great like books that should be published, but sometimes it just feels like it's like a sea, not a sea of mediocrity, because there are great books being published right now.
Yes.
But
it is that way.
And in the same way, like with writers, sometimes they respond to that in ways that maybe marginalized creators might not, and they don't question certain texts in ways that marginalized creators might. And then with the fans, that's a whole other thing, right? Because then you have, fan culture and criticism and journalism are so intertwined because they're the readers. So kind of seeing what people are responding to. If a Batman review gets a lot of clicks, and you're a struggling comic site, you're going to write Batman reviews, right?
Yes.
So there's all of this kind of this weird, terrible net that is pulling in 20 different directions. But within all of that, there are great, like marginalized comics writers, there are great marginalized comics journalists, there are great marginalized comics fans, right? They're still there, even though the structures may not be ideal.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I do think we are at least getting to be aware or being made more, in my case, being made more aware of the privileged position that I have, and, learning that there are these other voices out there that are so important, and also just how they how other people view things. I think there's just nothing more beautiful than when you really understand how someone else sees the world. I don't know, that's me, but sometimes it's very ugly to see how people see the world. So there is incredibly, unfortunately, you mentioned the structures of fandom, and there's incredibly divisive dialogue about comics, just as there is about everything else, and it's very toxic online. And it's, you've talked about having a safe space. It's very difficult to have a safe space from this. How do we maintain our mental and emotional health in dealing with the fact that just making simple statements about the comics we read can become attacked from a very disturbing place. Let's put it that way.
For me, Claire Napier, who was the former editor-in-chief of Women Write About Comics, when she handed over the reins along with Megan Purdy to me, she commented that I don't get in fights on Twitter. So that's part of it. I kind of see what goes on there, but keep my distance. But when something really seriously happens, and if it's one of our writers, again, that community aspect that we have behind the scenes is huge, and we will, circle the wagons and do what we need to do to keep each other safe. And we definitely have like a comment policy. We're not going to tolerate that on our site. There's only so much we can do on on Twitter itself and things like that. But we can certainly make sure we're backing up our writers in the back end.
And unfortunately, as site runners, we have to read the comments.
But then we can delete them. So.
Yes, we can, and ban
or edit them.
And
that one's fun.
Edit, yes, but the best for me is when I ban someone. Actually, that is, takes a very egregious, rule breaking to do that. But if you have to do it, you do it. And of course, certain words are banned and so on, because it's. I mean, I've been in comics dialogue for, as I said, a long time, since the days of Usenet. And, I've seen this trollishness go from just little pockets to what people think is normal. And it is I think moderation. It's funny because there used to, at some places, there was a let it slide policy, and every time that's tried, like on Twitter and Facebook, it's just a disaster, right?
No, I actually used to moderate Top Cow boards for Fathom, and you definitely need to moderate things sometimes. So
yeah, and just to protect abusive speech, just to be clear, this is to prevent abuse, harassment. You can have any ideas you want, but are within reason. That isn't hate speech, but you cannot be abusive or harass other readers or the site. And, we have to have some rules for that. But it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And unfortunately necessary. Now, we've been talking about sort of the structure of comics journalism, the freedom to write about it. And, freedom is free. And we've talked a little bit about the lack of every year on this panel, we talk about the lack of compensation, the lack of monetization for writing about comics. Unfortunately, it's an incredibly low paying field. And how do we deal with that? Not, Wendy, I know you have a Patreon and for Women Write About Comics, as does The Beat, by the way. But and I think, Tiffany, a lot of the sites you write for have Patreons, and which is great. And I do distinctly remember I remember when you started the Patreon, you had to pay your hosting bills. And I see on comics Twitter people talking all the time about the need to hear marginalized voices, and I'm like, well, that's great, why don't you support this Patreon?
Thank you for that.
Yes, because it was really lagging a little bit to get over the finish line, and I'm extremely thrilled that it did get over the finish line after me and some other people kind of got on, hassled people because you have to put your money where your mouth is with this. How do you keep on doing it, even knowing that, it's a struggle. I'm not going to lie. It's a struggle. I know firsthand what a struggle it is.
So we can't really afford to pay our writers. Everyone knows up front that this is a volunteer-run organization, which means we limit the amount of content that we put out each week because, we're not getting a whole bunch coming in all the time because people need to get paid, so they might write elsewhere. We do have a Patreon. There is a small following of people. It's kind of just enough to keep us afloat right now. So, and at the very least, I don't have to stress if those bills are at least paid.
Right.
So, and it does amaze me that we have so many people who still want to write with us despite not being able to pay them.
Right. So. Does that frustrate you as much as it frustrates me, that you have this Eisner Award winning website that promotes diversity, that, has so many writers who are queer, who are trans, who are women of color, and it's people should everyone, if anyone is watching this video, just go to the Patreon and please just give it $10 a month. That's all. Okay.
Thank you.
That's all. A cup of coffee, that's for me, that's just a cup of coffee and one breakfast sandwich at Starbucks. So here in New York. Yeah, just do it. I mean, this is what, anyway, obviously it frustrates me a lot. So Wendy, you don't get into fights on the internet. So I know you'll give me
You can fight for me, please.
Yes, I will. Yes. But anyway, I mean, how do you, is there a way that we can promote this more?
I don't know. I mean, I could put more effort into advertising us, and it is frustrating to see other places with bigger numbers of followers, and but I appreciate the ones that we do have. So they believe in us, and our whole thing is you're helping us keep doing what we're doing. And so I am grateful to the people who are.
Yes. I'm about to say you're all angels. You're all angels. So, I mean, Tiffany, how do you, is this a labor of love, or, is writing about comics, you're putting away socking away that money for, your vacation home?
I mean, I think this actually is a great topic for a panel about diversity, right? Because this is, like you were saying, put your money where your mouth is, but also for editors looking for marginalized writers, marginalized people make less money, right? Women make less money, people of color make less money, Black people make less money, trans people make less money. And so you have to consider that when you're hiring people, right? First of all, don't pay them less money, but also understand that when you're bringing people into the industry, they may not have had the same opportunities that other non-marginalized people have, right? Maybe they may need more hands-on editing. Maybe they need training. That doesn't mean they're not going to be a great writer. It just means that maybe they didn't land that internship for whatever reason, right? Or they couldn't take that internship because they had to work.
Yep.
So definitely something to keep in mind. That being said, I mean, there is very little money in this field, right? And a big part of it is it's a relatively, let's just say superhero comics. The superheroes are big. Superhero comics don't sell all that much in the grand scheme of things, right? And so we're speaking to relatively small audiences in a lot of cases. And so the big money's just not there. I think this is why we have so many sites that are solely focused on garnering hate clicks, although that's true in all aspects of journalism, or weird, misleading anything, and it is frustrating as a writer to see that that's what generates interest. But of course, that's human nature. But I think it is tough. I mean, it's when one is not writing for free, one is often writing for a lot lower than one's normal rate when writing for comics criticism. And that's for me, it's definitely a labor of love, because this is something that fascinates me creatively and artistically. I have a lot of opinions. So, hey, if I can get my opinions out there, that's good for me. But I think it's really worth saying that just the fact that there's no money in this keeps a lot of marginalized creators out of doing this, or out of doing this over a long period of time.
Yeah, that's absolutely 100% true. And I mean, it's been pointed out a lot that this whole system of free internships and volunteering does privilege people who could afford to do it. And a lot of, as you say, a lot of people of color, a lot of Black people, a lot of queer, trans people, they can't afford to take the time to do something for free. And it's something that you really, I mean, I've certainly been aware of it and trying to, be sensitive. The Beat, just for anyone who's watching, the Beat was monetized at one point. We had an owner who paid for things, and then we lost that funding. So it's been a challenge, to say the least, to try to find a way through, and plus a pandemic. So, but we do it for the love a lot of times. I guess I'm just a lifer, obviously, at this point. And I think it's just seeing great people like both of you come along and to just move the ball so much farther down the field that makes me excited about still being here. Um, what brings you joy about writing for comics? What are some of the comics that you've read that you just love lately? I mean, it is a little bit of a golden age. I mean, we certainly have more comics aimed. There's certainly kids comics are blossoming right now. Web comics with vast female readerships. I mean, I think queer comics have just really, become so on fire right now. It's really some great stuff. But yeah, what brings you joy about reading comics right now? What's some good stuff out there?
Do you want to take this one first, Tiffany?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Well, I just read the new Tilly Walden compilation, which was great. Tilly Walden is great. I have it right there. So it's Joe Frank Ascent. That is the art is by John Novak, and it's this illustration of these like originally broadcast on radio short stories that are just so bizarre, and that's from Fantagraphics that I loved. But Jalea by Junie Ba, which I've been really excited about.
Everybody, that book is
great,
super hot. Everybody's talking about that book, and it's published by TK. It's published by TKO, right?
Yeah,
which is interesting. Yeah, which is interesting because they're just getting so much attention for it.
Yeah, and I think you're right that there's a lot of amazing web comics. There's a lot of amazing kids comics. I'm very into the children's comics. There's just so much. Oh, well, speaking about money, there's money in it, right? And so they're getting a level of quality that is just incredible. And everything's beautifully designed and bound because it's published by Penguin, right? So there's and actually a lot of kind of queer representation, a lot of conversations around taboo subjects. I'm trying to remember what it was called. There was this great, I guess, YA middle grade graphic novel about periods and about
that was from First Second.
That was incredible, and I was just so moved by that, and just like I can't imagine how much life would be different if that book had come out when I was a kid, right? So we're seeing this great kind of groundswell, and I think that's what I get excited about, right? Not only like as a reader, like things excite me, it's the fact that things are changing in a lot of ways. Some things feel like they're never going to change, and it is very frustrating, but sometimes you look at a book and you're just like, it's incredible that this is out. And I think that's kind of what brings me joy, not only bringing attention to new books that are really incredible and that people should be reading, but like sometimes just like, again, I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of opinions. And like there's nothing I enjoy more than like sitting at a bar and talking to a stranger and like changing their mind about like a movie or something. It's like, you understood that movie wrong, and you're gonna listen to my 10-minute spiel. And that's a lot of where my writing comes from, is like I'm seeing something different from what a lot of other people are saying. Like, here is my argument for why, whether or not you actually end up believing it, like you can now see like my thought pattern. And just bringing attention to good art. Not it's not always good art, right? Sometimes it's something that's interesting or something that starts a conversation, but it's bringing a more thoughtful, in-depth kind of engagement with the media that we consume, which I think is important, right?
Mm-hmm. And Wendy, any things that bring you joy?
Well, Liz, who was the one who got me into Women Write About Comics, is actually kind of our leader of our comic book club, our ladies comic book club, when we meet monthly. And just first of all, the unique women who are part of that and the different perspectives has been amazing. And the conversations that we have about the comics we read, and then the recommendations from that have been amazing. So we just last month we read Cyclopedia Exotica, which we loved. We'd read Woman World before by the same author. We've got the Embodied Poetry Anthology coming up. We've been looking at a lot of comics of telling Indigenous stories and by Indigenous creators. Yes. Just a lot of things kind of off the beaten path. And then sometimes we'll throw in a superhero comic just to bring us back to that. But like we've literally already got ourselves planned all the way into 2022 for what we're going to read.
Wow.
Julia is definitely on there. I just had to put that one on there.
That's the early pick for book of the year, I got to say. Let me ask you both this, because this is a question that I think we've struggled with as site editors. I've certainly struggled with as a site editor, and but it's very important. Like, is it important to have? I mean, there are books that are coming out. I mean, you just mentioned, there's so many books by Indigenous creators now, which is fantastic because there were, so few historically. Is it, if you're doing a review of this book, is it important to have Indigenous reviewers review the material? Or, is it, I mean, there is a tendency to only do the Black History Month thing, like, oh, here is a Black book, I must get a Black reviewer to review this. That's not always the right way, but then it's also good to have people who understand the material. So anyway, what's the way forward on this, or at least what's some thoughts on that?
I think for me, it depends on the piece. If it's like the one big thing of the year, yeah, you should probably let the freelancer who needs those clicks get those clicks, right?
Right.
And I think it depends on the topic. The more complex and kind of gray the area is, I think the more important it is to get someone of that identity. Oh, it's my dog. She just kicked the little door stopper. But like, I think white creators should cover books written by POC, right? Like, I don't think people should be constrained in the box of only writing about their identity. But if a book came out that was strongly about identity and you only have white writers, like, you should definitely find someone who can. I think in the future, when everyone is like really well represented,
yes,
and everything's perfect, I think the conversation will be different. But right now, I think it's important to elevate voices that may not be elevated, and especially when we're talking about complex topics, to make sure that the person talking about them understands the complex topics. And this like can be expanded beyond identity to, you'll see this all the time. You'll see a film reviewer who knows nothing about a genre review and just say this is trash, and people will be like, this is actually like the best film of the last 5 years, because they don't understand what they're responding to. Like, they don't have the vocabulary to do that. And in the same way, if a person's not equipped with the vocabulary they need to respond to something, and we see this too with actually people who aren't familiar with graphic novels reviewing graphic novels, and they don't even have the vocabulary to respond to things. And if someone doesn't have vocabulary to respond to things, the review is not going to be good, right? So I think, but like, if you have like an action adventure with like an Asian lead, like, I don't think you need necessarily an Asian writer to respond to that.
Right. So Tiffany, what you basically just said is that you need to be a good editor. So challenge thrown down. I mean, it's true. You need to. That's actually what good editing is judging what you say, what the material is. And of course, I think, say the obverse is also true, that it is incredibly like typical to only have, if you have an Asian writer write about Asian books, or women write about women's comics by women. I mean, it's the old only women. At DC, Wonder Woman was the only book that women writers were allowed to write until very recently. So the obverse obviously is true too. Don't keep people in a box, people.
I think if you're a writer and an editor, as well, yes, step back if there is something that a marginalized person could speak better to. But also, if there's something that you don't understand, take the time to do a little background research before you write out that passionate review. Like, that's your job as a writer and an editor, to take the extra steps. So,
yeah, definitely. Do you think, what do you feel overall is the state of comics journalism right now? I mean, Tiffany, you write for a lot of different sites. And I mean, there are some, you've mentioned Panel by Panel, which is an amazing, finally someone did the monthly PDF comics magazine, right? A lot of people have tried, and it's, Hassan and everybody has done such an amazing job there. There's I mean, Comics XF has come up, and Shelf Dust and Comics Bookcase, and there's, I mean, we love there's the site that you wrote a piece for, and I'm forgetting all the names. There's so many I can't even keep them straight. So yeah, what do you think is the overall state right now? Are you encouraged, or is there a lot of work to be done?
Oh, I think there's great stuff out there. Like there's just incredible writing going on, like beautiful writing done by really thoughtful, smart, insightful writers. So I'm very encouraged by that. I would like them to be able to make some money. I'd like them to be able to have more readers. I think those are kind of two separate things. Like whether or not this stuff is good. There's great stuff out. Is there a way to make it sustainable? Is the question, right? And I think this is why what Wendy was saying about community is so important, right? Because it's really easy to burn out doing stuff like this. But when you make friends, for freelancers out there who aren't at one publication and don't have like a network like that, like reach out to someone whose article you liked, right? And then just start becoming friends, right? This is how adults make friends. Unfortunately, it sucks. And then just talking to people when things get hard, or supporting your friends, supporting their work, and kind of, I think that's the thing that's going to save us. Human relationships, right? It's community. It's taking the time to help people to try to heal together, try to get through this mess together. I mean, I think a lot of people saw this during the pandemic. It's so easy to feel isolated when working at home, and writers usually are working at home, right? So a lot of times you just have to reach out and talk to people. And to me, that's kind of where the future is. Hopefully the future will also have money and also a way of sustaining this amazing writing, because people aren't going to be able to do it for not a lot of money forever, right?
Yeah.
There's a certain point when you lose energy, or you just don't have the money or time to do that anymore. And to sustain like this incredible writing that's coming out in response to the incredible comics coming out, there needs to be a change. I don't know the answer to how that change will happen, but I know on the writing side, it's incredibly important to me to be able to reach out to peers and to editors who I trust and love, and just talk to them. I think that's also where a lot of innovation happens, right? Like speaking about Hass at Panel by Panel, there are things that I've written for him there that I probably never would have written if Panel by Panel didn't exist. Or even like I got the chance to guest edit an issue last year, and having editors who are supporting you, who want to work together to like create a vision of what comics journalism can be, is like the most exciting thing there is, right? That's kind of why we're in this, is to be able to dream up a better future together. But so I feel both very encouraged and very discouraged, which I think is just true about loving comics in general, right? There's always cool new things, and then there's just this really oppressive, terrible history and system that has existed forever and is still very much in existence now. And I think like you can't focus on one or the other, right? They both exist, they coexist. And so finding a balance between trying to change what is bad and also to encourage what is good, and hopefully find a way to help it last, is kind of the only thing you can do. We'll see how long I lasted it, but it is just, it's a moving target. It's a shifting goal line. But I love it. Also, I hate it. But I do love it. And there's a lot of exciting work going on.
Yeah. Wendy, any overall thoughts though?
No, I think Tiffany really covered covered everything.
Yeah. Well, I do know the one way to really, improve comics journalism is a support the Women Write About Comics Patreon, and also support the sites that Tiffany writes for, and hire them both to write and pay them. So that's wonderful. If you can, if you have the resources to do that, and if you're going to steal writers, some Women Write About Comics, pay them. So that hopefully we can get a little bit closer towards that, and uh just keep doing good things in a fair way for everybody. So Wendy and Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us for this panel, and San Diego Comic Con, thank you for hosting this panel. And next year, we'll all be sitting at the table together, right?
Yes, in San Diego, where
Yeah.
it's, nice and sunny,
Yes,
but
the
sunny.
sunny, and then the water. We could smell the ocean. Next year for sure.
Next
But
year.
anyway, thank you again so much, Tiffany and Wendy,
Thank
and
you.
take care and stay safe.
Bye.